False happiness. The sun rose gently over the peaceful streets of Maplewood, a picturesque suburb just outside Portland. Morning light spilled into the Donovan household, filling the kitchen with a golden warmth. Sarah, armed with her favorite blue apron and a quiet hum, moved gracefully between the stove and the counter. She poured orange juice into little dinosaur cups for her 6-year-old son, Ethan, and set the table with practiced care. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, fresh berries. In the Donovan home, breakfasts were more than just meals. They were rituals, small acts of love that kept the family connected in the rush of modern life. David, Sarah's husband, emerged from upstairs, still in his running clothes, cheeks slightly flushed from his morning jog. He smiled and ruffled Ethan's hair before planting a quick kiss on Sarah's forehead. To any outsider, their household would seem idyllic. A loving couple, an adorable child, the kind of suburban stability people dream of. Sarah savored these mornings and the security they brought. Yet beneath her cheerful efficiency, there was always a trace of effort. She managed the household calendar, remembered birthdays and playdates, planned date nights, and kept anxieties about the future at bay. She juggled picking up groceries and organizing the PTA bake sale, with keeping the spark alive in her marriage. It was exhausting sometimes, but Sarah wore her responsibilities like invisible armor, protecting the happiness she'd worked so hard to build. Outside the window, the Donovans' yard was freshly mowed, the flower beds blooming thanks to one of Sarah's Sunday gardening projects. Neighbors often waved as they walked their dogs past. Sometimes, Jessica, Sarah's best friend since college, and now her closest neighbor, would drop by for morning coffee. Jessica was vibrant, fashionable, and full of laughter. Their friendship was the kind people envied. Together, they could dissolve stress into giggles and inside jokes over mugs of steaming coffee. That morning, as Sarah cleared the dishes and listened to Ethan's stories about dinosaurs, everything seemed right. Jessica texted, sending a meme that made Sarah laugh aloud. Later, she joined Sarah for a quick walk around the block while their sons rode their bikes ahead. They chatted about school applications, grocery prices, David's new job, and an upcoming community barbecue. It was all comfortingly mundane, safe, predictable. But as Sarah wiped down the counters, she caught the briefest ripple in the air, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way David had glanced at his phone before leaving for work, smile faltering for just a second. Or perhaps how Jessica had seemed distracted during their walk, eyes darting to her own phone, laughter coming a beat later than usual. The moments were fleeting, barely perceptible, and easily shrugged off. Sarah chided herself for being silly. Everyone had stress, after all. That evening, after Sarah tucked Ethan into bed with his favorite book, she checked her own phone. There were messages from the neighborhood group chat, reminders from the school, a short "love you" from David, and a series of emojis from Jessica. It all looked normal, so normal that Sarah felt a wave of relief. She spent the last moments of her day sitting in the quiet living room, a scented candle flickering on the coffee table. The house was peaceful, thick with the comforting sounds of family. The hum of the dishwasher, Ethan's soft snores, the distant creak as David finished up emails upstairs. Sarah leaned back and let herself believe, at least for tonight, that everything in her world was as happy and whole as it appeared. Unbeknownst to her, the shadows in her perfect home were just starting to stretch. The first seeds of doubt. Sarah had always trusted rhythm, Mornings passed in busy harmony. Work weeks tumbled into weekends, and each member of the Donovan family played their part. But as summer drifted in, subtle shifts began carving gentle ruts in her carefully constructed routine. What started as tiny aberrations soon grew into nagging questions. It began with David's increasing absences. He'd taken to returning home late from work, offering careful explanations about new projects or after-hours meetings. At first, Sarah didn't mind. David's career had always demanded flexibility, but the frequency began to grate on her. Sometimes, he wouldn't sit down for dinner until Ethan was already in his pajamas, the leftovers quietly reheated by Sarah, who would watch him eat with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then there were his mood swings. The gentle, easygoing David she'd known seemed to vanish some nights, replaced by a man who snapped at trivial things. The bacon too crispy, Ethan's homework spread across the table, even a misplaced water glass. His apologies came quickly, but each time, Sarah sensed a widening distance, a cold undertone that hadn't been there before. She tried to brush off her unease, blaming stress or deadlines. Yet, it was hard to ignore the other change: David's sudden protectiveness of his phone. Once, he left it charging in the kitchen, ignored notifications, and opened screens. Now, it was always in his pocket, or face down, nearby. Sarah caught him replying to messages, with his back turned in the bedroom, or heading out to the porch to take calls late at night, his voice low and clipped. Jessica's behavior shifted too, though at first Sarah thought little of it. Her best friend's laughter seemed thinner lately, their regular coffee catch-ups tinged with an odd distraction. Jessica excused herself from get-togethers with unusual frequency, blaming errands or appointments. When she did show, she seemed preoccupied, glancing at her watch, her smile a little forced. Still, Sarah tried not to overthink. She gently asked David if everything was all right at work, hoping he'd confide in her like before.
Yes.
He dismissed her concerns with practiced ease, brushing off her questions with a tired smile. "It's just a busy quarter, babe. I'm fine." When Sarah hinted at Jessica's distance, he shrugged. "People get busy, Sarah. Don't take it personally." Nights grew longer. Sarah lying awake, replaying conversations and noticing details she'd once ignored. David's quick glances at his watch when Jessica's name came up in conversation. Jessica's abrupt subject changes whenever David's job was mentioned. The way they sometimes exchanged glances at family events. Quick, unreadable. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by Jessica's house unannounced, hoping to drop off a new book. She found Jessica flustered, hesitant at the door, claiming a migraine, and declining Sarah's invitation to lunch. Standing on the porch, Sarah glimpsed an unfamiliar unease, a shadow flickering across Jessica's face. Was she imagining it? Was her marriage, her friendship, really as strong as it seemed? Or was she simply letting insecurity nibble at the edges of her happiness? Sarah scolded herself for being melodramatic. But that night, as she folded laundry alone and heard David chuckling at his phone behind the closed office door, she felt the question gnaw at her again. Days passed. Sarah became hyper-aware of routine. The times David left for work, the exact words Jessica used in her texts. She tried to reason with herself. It's all in your head. But the uneasy tension wouldn't leave. She confided nothing to anyone, kept up her bright facade, buried her doubts under PTA emails and grocery lists. But somewhere, deep down, a crack had formed, quiet but undeniable. It was the first time in all her years of marriage and friendship that Sarah wondered If these two
I am on a
people,
client call.
her closest confidants, might be capable of a betrayal she'd never have thought possible. The painful truth Sarah never expected the truth to come crashing in on an utterly ordinary afternoon. The sky was heavy with summer haze, and Ethan was sprawled on the living room carpet, building a city out of Legos, blissfully unaware of the silent storm brewing inside his mother. Sarah herself moved through the day on autopilot, folding laundry, sipping coffee, going through the motions while her mind whirred with unanswered questions. That afternoon, while gathering towels in the hallway, Sarah heard David's voice carry down from the bedroom, muffled, tense, through the partially closed door. At first, she assumed he was on a work call, but something in his tone tugged at her attention. She paused, resisting the urge to eavesdrop, but then she heard a name, Jessica, soft but unmistakable. Her hands froze. Sarah's mind raced, weighing the line between trust and suspicion. She hovered in the hallway, heart thudding loudly, straining to catch bits of the conversation. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." She stepped away quickly, feeling heat rush to her cheeks. Doubt slammed into her with a force she'd tried to ignore for weeks. Still, a desperate hope pushed her to rationalize. Could it be a misunderstanding? An inside joke? She spent the rest of the day fighting back tears, moving robotically through her chores and motherly duties, careful not to let Ethan catch a hint of her distress. After dinner, while David was putting Ethan to bed, Sarah found herself staring at his phone. Left carelessly, face down on the kitchen counter for the first time in weeks. Her hands shook as she picked it up, heart pounding with guilt and dread. She hesitated. She had never invaded his privacy before, but the urge for truth was overwhelming. What she found was both devastating and undeniable. A string of late-night messages, photos, inside jokes, even a calendar invite, cleverly disguised as a work meeting. For the same afternoon, Sarah had been left waiting, alone, at her favorite coffee shop. Sarah dropped the phone as if it had burned her. From the bathroom, she could hear Ethan's soft laughter and David's low, soothing voice as he read a bedtime story. Her heart broke anew as reality set in. Her marriage, her friendship, her trust, all shattered in the space of a few cruel messages. But Sarah did not explode. She did not confront David that night or collapse in tears where anyone could see. She moved through the evening in a daze, preparing Ethan's lunch for the next day, washing dishes, loading the dishwasher in strict, methodical silence. Inside, however, her turmoil raged. Pain fought with anger. Humiliation battled with cold practicality. Beneath everything, the instinctive urge to protect her son anchored her actions. She knew, in that moment, that she could not let her emotions destroy what stability was left. Not yet. Late that night, after Ethan had drifted off and David was asleep, Sarah sat in the darkened kitchen, replaying everything she had learned. The pain was raw, but a grim determination kindled inside her chest. If she was going to confront this, if she was going to defend her dignity, her family, her son, she would need proof, and more than just anguish-fueled accusations. Sarah carefully backed up the evidence, sending copies to a private email. Then she wiped away the tears and steeled herself. The betrayal was real. She could no longer deny it. But how she chose to respond, that would be her decision alone. Dawn was still hours away, but Sarah could feel the first icy edge of resolve forming. The cracks in her perfect world had split wide open. There was no going back now. silent strategy. The world outside moved in slow motion, or so it seemed to Sarah. The sidewalks of Maplewood bustled with neighbors walking their dogs, joggers pounding the pavement with earbuds in, children zooming by on bicycles, crowned in bright summer helmets. To an observer, Sarah appeared unchanged, a steady, reliable wife, a loving mother, orchestrating breakfast, errands, and bedtime stories with her usual grace. But behind her calm, warm smile, new resolve was growing. Sharp, private, ferocious. No one, not even David or Jessica, could have suspected that Sarah's life had quietly split in two. The facade, and the secret plan she was now constructing in the shadows. The first days after her discovery were marked by a numb, mechanical precision. Sarah set herself into a rhythm, focusing even harder on Ethan's needs and the logistics of daily life, while her mind compartmentalized her pain into something cold, analytical, and purposeful. Emotional breakdowns would come later, in the privacy of her locked bathroom, behind the roar of the shower, in public, and especially around David. She was an actress worthy of envy. She was determined not to make a single misstep. If she crumbled now, even for a moment, David might sense something was wrong. He might cover his tracks. He might alert Jessica. Instead, Sarah honed every movement, every word, every expression. She learned the art of the casual glance, the meaningful silences. She began to listen far more intently to conversations at the dinner table, David's phone calls taken just out of earshot, even Ethan's innocent remarks. Daddy and Miss Jessica were at the park today, which once would have barely registered. Gathering evidence, Sarah knew trust, once broken, could never cure itself. The fissures only deepened. She needed more than fleeting suspicions. She needed undeniable proof. Her first steps were small, checking phone records, scrolling through old messages when David was in the shower, noting the times he left the house and the vague destinations he gave her. She grew meticulous, mapping patterns, late Tuesday meetings, odd detours on Saturday mornings, Jessica's suddenly unpredictable schedule. She started documenting everything. A notebook, small enough to hide in a kitchen drawer, became her confidant. She filled it with tiny observations, dates, times, snatches of overheard conversation, changes in David's mood before and after certain phone calls, the look on Jessica's face when she thought no one was watching, when she found credit card charges for dinners in parts of town David never mentioned. She took photos of the receipts. She kept screen captures of text notifications that flashed on his home screen and recorded the length of phone calls to Jessica's number. Late at night, after the house had settled into quiet, Sarah's laptop became her partner and her shield. She read advice from women who had walked through betrayal before her, learning tricks to back up phone data, stealthy ways to save photos and texts without alerting anyone. On weekends, if David took Ethan out to the park or movie to give you some alone time, Sarah used the breathing room to search for anything that might tie their lies together. Calendar invites disguised as work meetings, coded emails, secret social media profiles. Her heart ached with every discovery, but pain quickly congealed into discipline. She rehearsed what she would do with the evidence. Should she confront David alone, or lay a trap that would force both him and Jessica into the light? Would she involve lawyers, recordings? Would she stage the confrontation in public, or keep it in the privacy of their home? Understanding motives and weaknesses to catch her betrayers off guard, Sarah realized she needed to understand what bound them together, and what might break them apart. Late at night, she pored over old memories, reliving moments between David and Jessica that she'd once found charming or heartwarming. She remembered their laughter at family cookouts, their inside jokes, their shared glances that, in hindsight, felt loaded with secrets. She remembered how Jessica had confided, years ago, about her struggle with loneliness after a difficult breakup, how Sarah had urged David to check on Jessica, even telling him, "She trusts you. You're like the brother she never had." The irony of it stung sharply now. David's career anxiety was another chink in his armor. He'd spent months fretting about stagnation at work, about feeling invisible. Sarah saw now how Jessica's flattery, her easy admiration, might have fed his wounded ego. Motive was everywhere. What mattered was how to flip it against them. Sarah began to test boundaries. She would drop Jessica's name mindlessly at dinner and watch how David's face tightened ever so slightly, how his fingers tensed on his fork. When Jessica visited, Sarah watched her closely, creating mundane situations that forced all three to interact, offering to host a neighborhood brunch, volunteering David to help Jessica move a piece of furniture, planning playdates with their kids. She watched for body language, for secret eye contact, for any sign that their guilt might slip through the cracks. She also kept her circle of trust tight. There was an urge some nights to call her mother, her sister, a childhood friend, anyone who would listen and share the crushing weight. But Sarah held herself back. If her secret plan leaked, even by accident, she'd lose the element of surprise. Instead, she built an alibi for her curiosity. If anyone noticed her acting distracted or withdrawn, she had work stress or was volunteering too much. Simpler to be busy than heartbroken. Flashbacks and reflection on rare nights when the house was still, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on what was being destroyed. She would sit in the dimly lit living room, remembering how she and David had built this life together. Brick by metaphorical brick, their first Christmas in the house, snow piling up outside, and laughter echoing off the walls. Jessica's arrival in their circle, bringing with her an energy and joy that once felt like a blessing. Sometimes, in the haze of fatigue, Sarah felt haunted by waves of nostalgia and longing. She ached for the days when her biggest concern was finding time for a date night, when secrets meant nothing more than planning surprise birthday parties. These memories hurt to touch, but they reminded her of what was at stake and what, in the end, she was fighting for. Her dignity, her son's stability, the truth that her life would not be defined by betrayal. Constructing the trap gradually, a plan formed, a confrontation so carefully plotted that neither David nor Jessica would have time to rewrite the story in their favor. Sarah envisioned a scene where they were surrounded by family, friends, people whose respect they valued. She knew it would need to be irrefutable, undeniable, screenshots, printouts, perhaps even voice recordings, assembled into a chilling, irrefutable mosaic. Sarah started making discreet inquiries, looking for the right opportunity, an anniversary, a birthday party, some gathering she could frame as a celebration while making final preparations behind the scenes. Each step was rehearsed in her mind, every detail calibrated. How she would reveal the truth, safeguard Ethan from the fallout, claim the narrative as her own. A new kind of strength. With every layer of evidence and contingency laid down, Sarah discovered a different side of herself, a resilience she never knew she possessed. The feeling was bittersweet, She would have traded anything to not need such strength. But now that the cracks in her family's foundation were exposed, she refused to go quietly, refused to play the fool. She was fighting not only for answers, but for justice on her own terms. Outside, in the lengthening evening shadows, Maplewood's peace seemed untouched. But inside the Donovan home, change was coming.
Just a meme.
Sarah felt it with every beat of her heart, a sense that at long last, she was no longer at the mercy of secrets. The silent strategy was underway, patient and relentless. She was ready for the day her truth would no longer be hidden. Escalating pain as the days turned to weeks, the tangled web of deceit around Sarah seemed to thicken. The initial shock of discovery faded, replaced by a grinding ache that grew heavier each day. Each morning, Sarah summoned her practiced smile, cheery, competent, loving, and slipped it on like a mask before stepping into the world. But beneath the surface, stress chewed at her nerves, and exhaustion pressed deeper into her bones. Sarah had become an expert observer, cataloging every contradiction and subtle shift within her home. She noticed the clipped way David now answered her questions, his eyes darting from her face to his phone, as if calculating how quickly he could escape the conversation. In the evenings, he lingered over emails and calls with clients, his work now a shield rather than a source of pride. If Sarah pressed for details, he grew defensive, shrouding the mundane in secrecy. Jessica, too, had changed in ways that wounded Sarah as much as they confused her. She texted less frequently, and, when she did come by, arrived jittery, glancing at the clock and offering weak excuses to hurry away. The laughter that once filled Sarah's kitchen had gone brittle. Jessica's smile stretched too tight, her words guarded, her phone never far from reach. Sarah told herself daily that she needed to wait, to gather more evidence, to keep her own vulnerabilities hidden. But as the lies stretched thinner, the tension in the house thickened. There were nights when David would walk into the bedroom, mumbling a brief good night, before rolling over with his back to her, already miles away. Sarah would lie awake beside his sleeping form, staring at the ceiling, her mind buzzing with doubts and suspicions that never seemed to rest. She noticed, too, the little changes in Ethan. Always a sensitive soul, he began to cling tightly to Sarah at bedtime, asking questions he'd never asked before. Some days, it felt as if the whole neighborhood sensed the undercurrent of tension flowing from the Donovan house. At block parties or backyard barbecues, Sarah's relatives would occasionally shoot her worried looks. Her mother-in-law, usually brisk and distant, dropped by unexpectedly with pie or fresh vegetables from her garden, lingering longer than usual in the kitchen. "Everything all right, honey?" she'd ask, voice unusually gentle. Sarah found herself lying with practiced ease, insisting she was simply busy with PTA duties, tired from late nights with Ethan. Soon, the Donovans' friends began to sense something, too. Sarah found herself pulling away. She skipped book club meetings and Pilates classes, afraid her shield might crumble, afraid a single well-meaning question would shatter her composure in public. There were murmurs and sidelong glances at gatherings. She could almost hear the silent questions in the air. Was something wrong? Was Sarah ill? Was David having trouble at work? It was easier to become invisible than to let the mask slip. Inside the walls of her home, the facade grew harder to maintain. One evening, as Sarah loaded dishes into the dishwasher, she overheard David in the next room, his voice low and urgent on the phone. He spoke in short, clipped sentences, but the tone was unmistakable. raw,
He has no idea.
intimate. The kind of voice people used only for those they trusted most. She caught snatches. Soon, I promise. Be
He
patient.
left at 7:15.
And the
then
unnamed
again at
ache
9:30,
inside her
always
flared
vague about his
brighter.
destination.
Later that same night, Jessica appeared at the door,
Late Tuesday meetings,
claiming she needed to borrow
odd
sugar.
detours on
Her
Saturday
hands
mornings.
trembled as she cradled the mug Sarah offered, her gaze darting everywhere but Sarah's face. There was an awkward silence, too thick and brittle to be mended. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, forcing a smile. Jessica blinked, almost startled by the kindness. "I'm fine.
She had
Just
to learn how to back
tired,
up phone
I
data
guess."
stealthily.
Sarah watched as Jessica fled, leaving the sugar forgotten on the key counter, the door snapping shut behind her. Alone in the kitchen, Sarah's hands shook as she cleaned up, anger and grief swirling within her. The betrayal was no longer some distant threat.
And then, of course, there
It was
Mr.
here,
Williams.
alive in the house she'd built, poisoning every shared glance and half-hearted apology. As the summer wore on, both David and Jessica grew bolder, their caution slipping as their desire edged toward recklessness.
I know.
Sarah picked up strange, coded fragments in their conversations. There were hints, Jessica talking
Yes.
about a big change, David mentioning starting fresh. One afternoon, Sarah overheard them on the patio, their voices floating in through the kitchen window. "We just need to be patient. Sarah has no idea,"
I've just been
David
under
whispered.
so much work
Sarah
stress.
felt the chill settle over her heart. The two
This is
people she
beautiful.
trusted most were not
love
only
it.
deceiving her, but actively laying the groundwork for a future that didn't include her. The plan she'd once imagined as an insurance policy now felt urgent. Her only means of reclaiming dignity in a war she hadn't chosen. But the more they pushed forward, the more Sarah pushed back. Outwardly passive, inwardly fierce. She doubled down on her own strategy, checking locks on her phone, backing up evidence, rehearsing what she would say and do. Yet every step forward came at a price. Her patience frayed. Her emotions simmered dangerously near the surface. The person
for the
she
right
saw in the
opportunity.
mirror each morning was a
Or
stranger.
birthday party.
Eyes rimmed with exhaustion, lips pressed in a line of quiet
I must
determination.
reveal the truth.
One night, as thunder
And protect
rolled
my
over
son.
Maplewood, Ethan crawled into her bed, frightened by the storm. Sarah wrapped her arms around her son, pressing her cheek to his hair, letting the muffled rumbles hide her tears. For that moment, a fleeting refuge. She could forget the looming confrontation, forget the gathering pain, and remember only the love that had once made her family whole. Sarah's breaking heart turned day by day into armor. The more isolated she became, the more determined she was not to break in front of anyone. Not her enemies, not her friends,
Tell me what you
not
saw.
even her family.
I already told you.
If she had to suffer, she
And
would
then what
suffer
happened?
privately.
Nothing.
But she refused to let her silence
I am on
be
a client call.
mistaken for surrender. The pain was growing. So too was the resolve to end it, once
I really
and
need
for
to
all.
go.
The decisive gathering. It began as a simple idea, a celebration to bring everyone together. Sarah proposed the gathering under the auspices of tradition. It would be a joint anniversary and family reunion, the sort of festivity Maplewood's community calendar had always cherished. She planned it in methodical silence, hiding the tremor in her heart beneath a veneer of enthusiasm. In the weeks leading up to the event, she orchestrated every detail. No one, not even those closest to her, suspected the true purpose
Soon.
behind her invitations. The day of the party
patient.
dawned bright and warm, the kind of golden summer morning
I just needed
that
to borrow
seemed to
some
promise
sugar.
only good things. Sarah woke early. She moved through the house, straightening linens, arranging garden flowers, triple-checking her menu, and setting up an arch of balloons at the backyard gate
Are you
with
okay?
Ethan's eager help. Familiar
I am.
tasks calmed her nerves. By midday, the Donovans' yard was transformed. String lights and picnic tables rimmed the grass, platters of barbecue and bowls of salad waiting beneath crisp, white tablecloths. Family arrived first.
Starting fresh.
Sarah's
Big
parents,
change.
David's
big
brother
change.
and his wife, grandparents, cousins. Laughter
need to be
and the
patient.
smell of grilled corn wafted through the
Sarah
yard.
has no idea.
Friends filtered in, arms full of homemade desserts, children trailing behind them. Neighbors brought folding chairs. Ethan's school friends threw frisbees on the lawn. Sarah floated between groups, attending to guests, pouring lemonade for toddlers, refilling ice buckets, all as if nothing in her world was amiss. David was the perfect host, greeting each guest with open arms and easy smiles. Jessica arrived later, in a sundress too bright for her complexion, sunglasses perched to hide tired eyes. She hugged Sarah stiffly, laughed too loudly at a joke, and stayed at the edge of the crowd, phone clutched tightly in her hand. The tension between her and David was invisible to others, but almost suffocating to those who knew what to look for. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's senses sharpened. She noticed the way David's gaze flickered toward the patio whenever Jessica passed, the brief, loaded silences whenever someone mentioned
You want to do the red
how
one
close their two families were. She registered Jessica's hands, trembling, as she helped serve cake, her unease growing in proportion to the nearness of David. Sarah caught little exchanges, glances so brief that they would have been meaningless, but Sarah saw them all. The heat of the afternoon gave way to the gentler gold of early evening. The backyard hummed with conversation, bursts of laughter, children shrieking as they chased after fireflies. Sarah moved through the party with practiced grace, her composure intact. But
What was
inside,
that for?
every cell in her body tensed for what was to come. She had everything ready. In her pocket rested a small USB drive, and on her phone, a folder of screenshots, a digital arsenal of truth, fused together by the months of investigation and steady resolve. She had thought for countless nights about how to do this,
How
publicly,
close our families
surrounded
were.
by those whose presence would demand honesty,
Indeed.
or as much honesty as could be wrung out of two people caught in the act. As dusk descended and lanterns flickered to life along the fence, Sarah tapped her glass. Conversation softened, and the crowd naturally gathered around the largest outdoor table. She began with words everyone expected. She thanked them for coming, spoke of family traditions, the meaning of togetherness, and how hard it had been to keep her family strong in such turbulent times. She watched as David nodded solemnly, arm draped lightly around Ethan,
There's something
and
I
as
wanna
Jessica
share with you
smiled
all.
thinly across the table. Beneath Sarah's calm, her heart hammered. Gazes flickered between her and David, between her and Jessica. She breathed in, steadied herself, and then set down her glass. "There's something I want to share with you all," she said, calm but resolute. "Something important, something I can't keep to myself. Not after what I've learned."
To hide our
A hush
feelings much
fell.
longer.
Even the children sensed the change in atmosphere and were shooed off by Sarah's mother, who shepherded them inside with a tray of cookies. Sarah's hands only trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and the small Bluetooth speaker she had hidden in the centerpiece. She pressed play. David's familiar voice filled the night air, the recorded late-night conversation Sarah had captured weeks ago. The one where he whispered intimately to Jessica about the impossibility of hiding their feelings much longer. The words were unmistakable. A collective gasp went around the table. Faces blanched,
Do you think she
others
is okay?
flushed with horror. Jessica's hands
I
flew
don't
to
know,
her
but
mouth.
I hope so.
David leapt to his feet, but it was too late. Sarah had already clicked through images on her phone, holding them up. Text messages, photos,
This was my
calendar
family.
invites. Each piece of
I just
evidence
wanted the
landed
truth,
like a
no matter
stone,
how much it hurts.
undeniable, irrefutable. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. David stared at Sarah, shock and shame warring across his face. Jessica's eyes brimmed with tears. Family members turned to each other, whispering. Sarah's father reached for her hand. Jessica's husband, until then oblivious, recoiled as if struck, staring at the woman he thought he knew. Sarah steadied herself, voice clear but fragile. This was my family, and I loved you both. I just wanted the truth, no matter how much it hurts. David's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the table for support, but found none. Some relatives rose and stepped back, grief
It's all
and
right, you are
anger
safe.
etched
I'm
into their
here.
faces. Jessica fled from the table, chased by the hushed murmurs of guests, tears
Such a
streaking her
beautiful
cheeks.
party. I know.
Sarah
but
did
I
not
think it is
pursue
time for
her.
us to go.
She did not collapse. She stood at the head of her table, rooted in the majesty and fragility of the moment. All masks had dropped. The truth was out. There was pain, sharp and immediate, in every corner of the backyard. Some people stormed away, unable to process the confrontation. Others gathered near Sarah, offering silent support, a squeeze of the shoulder, a kind word, the promise of shelter and love. Ethan, emerging from the house, bewildered by the tension, rushed to his mother. Sarah scooped him up, her voice steady, as she assured him that she was here, that he was safe. The party dissolved in the wake of the revelation. Relatives shepherded their kids home. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Confidants lingered to offer rides or help clear the yard. David stood alone, surrounded by empty plates and upended chairs, the golden glow of lanterns now stark. Against the night, Sarah walked Ethan back inside, the two of them moving through the now silent house. Her hands shook, but not from fear. For the first time in months, the heavy weight of lies had been lifted, replaced by a raw, aching freedom. The truth was finally out. There was no turning back. Exposed truth. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded like a slow-motion avalanche, breathtaking and devastating at once. It was as if the world itself had been stunned into silence after Sarah's revelation. The crisp evening air, so recently alive with laughter and music, now felt charged with disbelief and sorrow. Lanterns continued to sway gently over the backyard, casting trembling shadows over clusters of stunned family and friends. Sarah remained standing where she had delivered her message, her hands pressed flat against the
okay, my
table
dear.
for balance. She felt unmoored, afraid that if she let go, she might simply fall into the void created by her own words. The world seemed muffled, voices distant, memory and reality blurring at the edges. For a moment, neither David nor Jessica moved. David's face, once composed and jovial, had collapsed, mouth contorted in shock, eyes darting from guest to guest,
Long ago,
looking
the
for
earth
something,
was ruled by
sympathy,
giants,
maybe,
creatures so
or
vast
an
they
escape
shook the
route.
ground with every step.
Jessica had staggered backwards, one hand to her chest, mascara streaking as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. The weight of so many eyes upon her seemed impossible to bear. No, Sarah, please,
So right at the time.
Jessica managed at last, her voice strangled by grief and humiliation. She reached toward Sarah, then withdrew, as if the very act of trying to explain would only expose her more. David remained silent, jaw clenched, color draining from his face. For a brief, painful moment, Sarah's eyes locked with his. She searched for something: remorse, love, understanding, but found only a hollow, wounded pride. In that instant, Sarah knew their marriage was truly lost. The connection she had nurtured for over a decade had been shattered by the very people she had trusted most. The guests began to react, some in whispers, others more overtly. Jessica's husband, who had watched the proceedings with growing confusion, now looked as if he had been struck. He stood up in abrupt silence, moved to the edge of the yard, and turned his back on the group. He did not speak to Jessica. Sarah could only imagine his heartbreak, the same bleak, searing pain that scorched her from within. A hush of disbelief held the group together. Then, voices rose in waves. Sarah's parents hurried forward, her mother guiding Ethan away from the heart of the commotion, her father's eyes shining with concern and a kind of helpless rage. Neighbors who had known the Donovans for years exchanged glances, shaking their heads, unsure if they should leave or try to comfort the family. David tried to gather himself. "Sarah, can we please just—" Jessica, nearly trembling, attempted to speak to her husband, but he recoiled. His face crumpled in dismay. She turned toward Sarah, as if seeking absolution, but Sarah only stepped back, steeling herself with a dignity wrought from pure survival. All that remained between them was a gulf of silence and regret. After long minutes, people began to move, some drifting away in discomfort, others clutching their children, a few offering sympathetic glances at Sarah. The party dissolved in the wake of betrayal, the sense of community forever changed. Inside the house, Ethan clung to his grandmother, confused, but sensing the deep tension. Sarah knelt, brushing the hair back from his forehead, whispering reassurance that felt both necessary and impossible. "We'll be all right, sweetheart. I promise. I love you." Sarah's friends and relatives filtered through the house, some offering to stay and help, others hesitant and awkward in the unfamiliar terrain of heartbreak. Her mother, ever the shield, offered quiet words. Her father stood nearby, silent and fierce, ready to defend her, but powerless to mend what had been broken. Outside, the remnants of the celebration mocked Sarah's pain. Half-eaten cake, overturned chairs, scattered toys. David remained on the patio, speaking in hushed, desperate tones to his brother. But no words could undo what had been revealed. He glanced toward the house, as if hoping for a sign from Sarah. But she had already walked upstairs, Ethan resting against her seat, her own strength the only thing holding them both upright. Jessica was gone by then, her departure swift, head bowed, shoulders shaking. The sound of her hurried footsteps down the driveway echoed long after the last guest had left. Hours passed. Sarah moved through the silence of the house, numb and shaky. She washed the remnants of the party from her hands, the frosting, the sweat, the guilt, until her fingers wrinkled, as if cleansing herself of the life that had been ripped away. Upstairs, she tucked Ethan into bed, reading softly from his favorite dinosaur book, careful to keep her voice from breaking, determined to give him the sense of safety that had been so violently threatened. Once Ethan slept, the exhaustion crashed over her in waves. In the aftermath, Sarah walked through the empty downstairs rooms, returning again and again to the table where the confrontation had occurred. hearing the echoes of confessions, of shock, of loss. She replayed the memories, the laughter, the shared glances, the casual affection between David and Jessica that she'd ignored,
Is everything
all
all right with you?
recast now
Yeah,
as
I'm
evidence,
fine.
as warning signs. It was almost impossible to view the past with new
Is
eyes,
everything all right at work?
but she forced herself to do it, to see not just the
I'm fine.
betrayal, but the warning signals that grief and love had hidden from her vision. Late at night, when the house was still, Sarah sat by the window,
Hi, is
knees
everything
drawn
okay?
to her chest,
Yes.
staring out at the dark garden where everything had changed. The voices of friends and family lingered in her ears, but above all, she heard the words she had spoken. The choice to bring secrets to light, to claim her own pain, rather than let it consume her in silence. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. There would be consequences, decisions, a future she had never imagined.
Jessica!
There would be lawyers, uncomfortable conversations, and long, sleepless nights. Jessica and David would face the judgment of their families and friends. She imagined the fallout, the blame, the sorrow.
Last night was
There would be
incredible.
more pain,
I can't stop
so
thinking
much
about
more.
you.
But also, perhaps, a glimmer of release, a sense that truth could be its own form of healing. Perhaps, in the soft hours before dawn, Sarah began, incredibly, to breathe a little easier. The truth, however devastating, was hers now, undeniable, exposed, and, at last, fully named. Consequences and choices, the days that followed the revelation, blurred together in a haze of awkward silences, half-finished sentences, and stinging phone calls. It seemed as though the world itself had rearranged in the
And the
aftermath.
little bunny drifted
And
off
Sarah's
to
home
sleep.
was at the epicenter of the tremors. Unlike the immediate shock and confusion of that night, reality now settled over Maplewood with a heavy, suffocating certainty. Sarah awoke each morning to a house unnaturally quiet. David had taken to sleeping in the spare room. The tension between them had coagulated into an impenetrable barrier. They spoke, if at all, about logistics. Ethan's school project, who would buy groceries, bill payments where signatures were needed. Conversations were measured and clipped, every word loaded with the memory of what had happened. Outside the walls of her home, consequences unfolded in relentless, unpredictable ways. Whispers spiraled through the neighborhood more quickly than Sarah could keep up with.
Focus.
Friends who had once crowded the Donovan
Next task.
family's kitchen for impromptu brunches now seemed unsure. Some texted vague apologies, others offered sympathy, and a few quietly disappeared. At school drop-off, Sarah felt the lingering, scrutinizing stares of other parents. Even the casual
no
waves
idea.
exchanged over hedges now carried a reserve,
He has
as
no
if
idea.
everyone was afraid of getting too close to someone so publicly wounded. For David and Jessica, the reckoning was even more pronounced. David
He left at
endured the silent
7:15,
disappointment of
then
his
again at
family.
9:30.
His brother
Always
barely
vague
spoke
about
to
his
him.
destination.
His parents expressed their heartbreak in
Late
clipped,
Tuesday
disappointed
meetings.
tones
Odd
on the
detours
rare
on
occasions
Saturday
they
mornings.
visited. Jessica, once the social heart of the neighborhood, withdrew almost entirely. Her own marriage dissolved quickly, her husband packing a suitcase in a silent, devastating exit. Friends who had once relied on her humor and energy now sent only curt messages,
She had to learn
questions
how to back up
about her
phone data
well-being
stealthily.
laced with undercurrents of anger and disbelief. Sarah, for all the heartbreak she endured, was surprised at the depth of support she received from unexpected places. Her mother and father became her anchors, filling her fridge with casseroles,
And then, of course,
watching
there was
Ethan
Mr.
for an
Williams.
evening so she could sit alone and gather her thoughts, or simply folding laundry at her side in a companionable silence. Old friends from college reached out after years of minimal contact, reminding her that she was not,
I know.
and never would be, truly alone. Yet, every solace was shadowed by the need to choose
Yes.
what came next. With the worst secrets out in the open, Sarah faced options that felt both empowering and terrifying. The thought of forgiveness flickered through her mind late at night, a faint ember
I've just been
amid
under
the
so
ruins
much
of her
work
life.
stress.
Could she ever rebuild with David? Could she find
This
it
is
in herself to forgive Jessica?
I love it.
And if she did forgive, what would that say about her own worth? Legal matters loomed. One morning, Sarah sat in the office of a family lawyer, hands clasped tightly in her lap as she recounted the facts, omitting nothing. The lawyer was kind, thorough, professional, explaining her rights, the process of divorce, custody considerations, and the division of assets. Each word felt like another stitch, sealing shut a chapter of her life, replacing fear with a practical clarity she hadn't known she possessed. In the weeks that followed, she weighed her
Looking
choices
for the right
over
opportunity.
and
An
over
anniversary
again,
or a birthday
the
party.
decisions as dizzying as they were crucial. There were nights spent
I
staring at
must
the
reveal
ceiling.
the truth.
Ethan curled against
And
her
protect my son.
cimetière, his breathing a steady reminder of everything she still had to protect. She questioned herself constantly. Was it weaker to leave or to stay? Was the pain something that would diminish with time? Or was it a sign that she deserved and needed far more from life? One afternoon, she and David finally spoke, not as adversaries in a war, but as two people standing on the far side of devastation, struggling to define themselves in the wreckage. "I'm sorry, Sarah," David said, his voice rough,
Tell me
eyes
what you saw.
tired. Not
I
just
already
for what I
told you.
did, but for lying,
And then
for
what
making you
happened?
question yourself.
Nothing.
I know whatever happens, I
I
deserve
am on a
it.
client call.
Sarah's answer was gentle but firm. We both deserve honesty, David. Most of all, Ethan does.
I really
Whatever
need to go.
happens next, our son will not grow up thinking this is how love is supposed to feel. They discussed custody with a surprising calm, mapping out Ethan's routines and what would change. David wanted joint custody, not out of defiance, but genuine love for his son. Sarah agreed, not because she owed David, but because Ethan loved and needed his father, regardless of what had happened between his parents. With Jessica, reconciliation was not forthcoming. The pain was too fresh, too deep. When Jessica texted her an apology, pouring out paragraphs of regret, Sarah set her phone aside for days before responding with a single line. "I hope you
I
find
just needed
healing,
to borrow some
but I
sugar.
need my distance to heal too." Some wounds healed with time. Others simply became part of the landscape, tender to the touch, but no longer bleeding. As summer edged toward fall and maple, leaves scorched
Are you
orange
okay?
and red on the street, Sarah found
I am.
herself quietly rebuilding. She attended therapy, joining a group for women who had faced betrayal. There, in the candor of strangers turned friends, she found her own voice again. She began volunteering at school, helping with community events,
Starting
daring
fresh.
to laugh freely
big
at the
change.
jokes of
Big
others.
change.
Little by little, she reclaimed her identity outside the
just need to be
definitions of
patient.
wife and betrayed friend. Ethan gave her
Sarah has
strength
no idea.
without knowing it. His resilience, his deep care for both parents, his ability to find small joys, frogs in the backyard, stories before bed, reminded Sarah that rebuilding was possible, even beautiful in its difficulty. She started running in the morning again, breathing in the sharp air, feeling her body become her own once more. David and Sarah's interactions mellowed. They learned to share the background of birthday parties, school plays, in parent-teacher conferences with restrained civility. There were raw days, of course, but also the recognition that they could and would coexist as co-parents, no longer as partners, but as two adults invested in their son's happiness. The community, too, gradually adjusted. Some neighbors never again looked Sarah in the eye. Others invited her for coffee, tentative at first, but eventually easing back into genuine affection. She learned who would stand by her in storms and who vanished in disaster, and she stopped mourning the latter. In the quiet hours after Ethan went to sleep, Sarah sometimes found herself mourning not only what she'd lost, but the version of herself whose life was once mapped so clearly. Yet, more often, she felt gratitude for her own resilience and the chance to write a new ending. She understood now that pain, when faced head-on, could breed a profound kind of power. In the end, the consequences of betrayal were not merely loss and loneliness. They were also the birth of possibility, a chance for Sarah to choose for herself, to claim her future without shame or apology. For the first time in a long while, the choices were her own. And whatever lay ahead, she trusted herself to face it with fierce, hard-won grace. Renewal. Autumn arrived in Maplewood with a confidence Sarah admired. The air was brisk, the leaves brilliant, the town's pace shifting gently toward the holidays. The sharp tang of wood smoke mingled with the promise of new beginnings. And for the first time in months, Sarah caught herself truly breathing again. There was pain still. Yes, old heartbreaks didn't vanish overnight, but something new had taken root beneath the surface. A kind of resolute hope. The first steps toward reclaiming her life were small and private. Sarah started by rearranging the furniture in the living room, a symbolic act perhaps, but one that made the house feel just a little more like hers. She changed the curtains, painted the kitchen a pale, hopeful yellow, and dusted off a long neglected notebook. She used to jot down business ideas in the years before Ethan was born. At night, when the world was quiet and Ethan's soft snoring drifted from his bedroom, Sarah found herself sketching out plans. A small online bakery, a consulting venture, even a modest homeware shop. The dream was still hazy, but it was hers alone, not defined by anyone else's needs or betrayals. Backed by her parents' steadfast support, Sarah allowed herself to lean into help. Her father picked Ethan up from school when she needed time for business research or counseling appointments. Her mother taught Ethan to bake cinnamon rolls, filling the house with laughter and the aroma of warm sugar, a kind of sweetness Sarah thought she'd forgotten existed. Sarah's new journey brought unexpected gifts. When she confided her business idea to an old college friend, she received encouragement and introductions to a circle of women running their own startups. At first, Sarah felt out of place among these resilient, quick-talking entrepreneurs. But as she listened to their stories, so many of them marked by loss or beginnings born from necessity, she realized she was not alone. She joined a weekly virtual mastermind group, finding solace and strength in their camaraderie. There were missteps along the way. A failed attempt at a pop-up market, long nights spent revising her business plan, days when doubt crept in like winter frost. But each setback felt less like a defeat and more like evidence that she was, finally, moving forward on her own terms. Ethan, ever her gentle anchor, flourished with the newfound attention and routine. He adjusted to his parents living apart with a resilience Sarah marveled at. He made new friends, looked forward to weekends with his father, and never hesitated to tell Sarah he loved her, no matter how frazzled or
It's all right,
busy
you are
she
safe.
seemed.
I'm here.
Their bond, shaped now more by shared struggles than old routines, became even stronger. David's life changed in parallel, though not with the same lightness or hope. Living alone in a borrowed apartment in town, he wrestled with guilt and the consequences of his actions. Co-parenting, at first awkward and formal, gradually found a rhythm rooted more in respect than old affection. David made efforts to be present for Ethan, attending school plays, coaching his son's soccer team, sometimes pausing in the driveway at drop-off to thank Sarah. Awkward, but sincere. Their conversations, once full of old grievances, settled into clear boundaries and, oddly, a kind of peace. Jessica, meanwhile, faded from the social tapestry of Maplewood. After her marriage ended, she moved away, seeking a fresh start in a city where nobody knew her name. Now and again, Sarah heard updates through the grapevine. A new job, quiet attempts to rebuild. But the friendship was gone, a casualty buried somewhere between anger and acceptance. When Jessica sent an apology letter one autumn day, a raw, honest account of mistakes, regret, and hope for Sarah's healing. Sarah read it in the garden, the golden leaves swirling around her feet.
No, Sarah,
She didn't feel
please.
hatred, just a distant ache and a hope they both might eventually find peace. Sarah's business found its footing by winter. Her home kitchen became a flurry of activity. Sticky dough rising on the counter, boxes of pastries destined for customers she'd never met. Each online order felt like a small victory, proof that she could provide for her family, succeed on her own, and offer joy to others. She smiled more easily now, made time for herself, and learned the subtle pleasure of saying no to unreasonable demands, to old fears, to anything that didn't nourish her spirit. As the holidays approached, Sarah volunteered to coordinate the Maplewood Winter Festival. For the first time, she stood before her neighbors, not just as David's wife or Ethan's mom, but as her own person, organized, creative, compassionate. She watched Ethan play with friends, listened to the laughter that filled the park, and felt gratitude for both the storms she'd survived and the calm that had finally, blessedly, arrived. She also reached out, with quiet purpose, to women in the community facing their own trials. Sarah mentored a neighbor starting a craft business, offered encouragement to a newcomer struggling to make friends, and helped organize a support group for single parents. Her hardship had deepened her empathy and broadened her world. The more she gave, the more whole she felt. There were still hard days, of course, evenings when loneliness pressed against the windows, nights when memories crept in unbidden. But Sarah accepted them for what they were, part of the tapestry, not the whole of it. Over time, those moments grew less overwhelming, softened by new friendships, by Ethan's unfiltered devotion, by the quiet pride that came of building something lasting with her own hands. By the end of winter, when the first crocus buds split the frost and birds returned with their tentative songs, Sarah stood in the morning light, coffee in hand, and allowed herself a moment of pure contentment. She reflected on the journey, the false happiness, the collapse, the gathering of painful truth, all the losses, and all the love that had remade her. Sarah knew she would never be the same woman she once was. But as she looked around her kitchen, at the sunlight streaming through yellow curtains, at the photos of Ethan taped to the fridge, she realized she liked the person she was becoming. Honest, resilient, open to joy, The future was uncertain, but it belonged to her now. And for the first time in a very long while, that was more than enough.